pick your yeast, and we'll go back to how to do that. We'll finish that up. We're not done. But pick your yeast, pick how much alcohol you want to make, and on your hydrometer, you can look over there and say, okay, I want this much alcohol. I need this many points of honey. Start your must at that many points of honey. Run it dry. Stabilize it. And now you can do whatever the hell you want with it, and you don't have to worry about it turning into bombs later on. Now, I realize when I say that, a lot of people are going, I don't really want to put any chemicals in my mead. If you don't want to, that's totally fine with me, but I'll tell you what, my personal feeling is that's a whole lot of insurance that I can add into my batch that I know it's not going to go bad on me later down the road, or even worse, blow up and maybe, I don't know how you could hurt somebody unless they were holding it when it blew up, but
the other thing that gets me is that these chemicals that are so horrible that we shouldn't add to our mead are naturally produced by the yeast. We're just increasing the amounts.
Well, and so many people think that they get a headache because of the sulfites in the yeast, and I've read many, many articles that say less than 5% of the population are allergic to sulfites. And so generally it's other things. Some people say, well, I don't like the taste of sulfites. Generally, you don't put enough in a mead to be able to taste it, for anybody to taste it. But what it does do is it adds insurance so that your mead can age properly, so it's not going to get infected, and it will also protect your mead from oxidation. And, of course, the sorbate will make it so that your yeast can't reproduce. It doesn't mean it won't produce bottle bombs because you still have yeast in there that can still eat, but they can't divide. They can't bud any longer. So I think it's the easiest way to do is run your yeast dry, make them run out of food at a certain ABV level. Now you know what that is. Stabilize it, and now you can back sweeten it with either honey or different fruit juices or whatever you want. And people say, well, and the BJCP information says yeast mead is not supposed to taste like raw honey. I would bet money to anybody that you couldn't pick out a back-sweetened mead versus one that has residual sugar 6 months after it's been stabilized and back-sweetened. I think right away you can.
Yeah, I think
I'm sorry.
It depends on how it's done. I have judged back-sweetened meads that were at least that old, and you could sure tell that they had been back-sweetened improperly. So if it's properly done, then yes, it's gonna melt well. But if it's not, then it won't.
Do you know what the difference might be? Because I don't. I've only back-sweetened the way I do it, and you can't tell if mine have been back-sweetened or not. Do you have any tips about that by chance?
I don't generally back sweeten. I have most of my meads, I get them to where I want them to be, and that's where they are. So, I don't do a lot of back sweetening, but I've judged enough back sweetened meads to be able to tell the difference. And yeah, I mean, there's definitely good ways and bad ways to do it. And that's right up there with the Ask 5 Mead Makers Get 8 Answers thing. There's a bunch of different opinions. And so I'm not going to say that there is one perfect way to do it because I don't do it a lot, so I'm not the best person to ask. But I can equivocally say that, yes, you can in fact tell when it's not done right, whatever that is. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, and that's great point. Go ahead.
My opinion is that whenever I've back sweetened, I finish up a mead dry, I then clear it, I then get it all nice, and then I have to add sugar, honey, juice, and there's never enough room in the bottle, so then I've got to get another bottle out to mix it all up and get it. It all feels, for me personally, since I got the fermentation fridge, I will always put in extra honey up front, wait till it gets to where I want it to be, set the fridge on -3 degrees Celsius, and inside of a day it's stopped and ready to stabilize, and it's the same volume as I started with. I don't need extra bottles, I don't need to do any, so it's just an easier production line for me. That's not saying that I have any issue with back sweetening. I've done it before and I have no particular issue with it. I normally have used sugar, though, not honey, because I tend to use most of the honey in the primary and then go, oh, I don't have any left. But, yeah, so that's just my opinion.
I actually started saving a quarter pound of honey for back sweetening from every batch, just in case I decided I needed it.
Okay.
Hey, Misha, I have a question for you. Let's say you just read your gravity and you just put your stuff in the refrigerator or freezer, whatever you use to drop it down and cold crush it. How many points do you lose between putting it in when it's still active and when it's finally skidded to a halt?
Okay.
How many points do you...
If you put it into a freezer, which is set low with an external temperature control, I've found that it can drop as many as 10 points, which made it very much of a guessing game. However, when I've put it inside my fermentation fridge, which is an old school fridge that it wouldn't fit my 70-litre fermenter in there because of the big ugly thermostat. So I ripped the thermostat out and just hardwired the motor to on, and then used only the external thermostat and put the probe on the bottle, and I found that it drops. You might lose half a point, a whole point, but it's pretty much when I decide to drop it, it turns on and it drops it and it stops it. And that's what I was getting at earlier on when I said remove your thermostat, because you'll get a much better response out of your fridge, because your fridge is limited typically such that it won't go below 0 degrees. That's the way the internal thermostat is. So when you say go to 0 degrees, it's going to be like monitoring its curves and all of that. If you rip out that thermostat, then it's just going to go where the motor's going to run, and it's going to run until your system says stop running. So it makes your fridge work a bit harder, but it also gives you a lot better response and result from from the point where you want to do the cold crash.
Yeah. That's amazing. I didn't realize that they would skid to a halt that quickly, but I've never done it with something that was, below 30 degrees either, so. Yeah,
so I'm talking Celsius when I say -5, so we are talking below 30 degrees, but not much.
Yeah.
And so the real thing is that you're going from your fermentation temperature, which is around about 60, I guess. I'm translating in my head for the guys in America.
Right.
And then I'm chilling it down. It literally takes a couple of hours, and it's down to -3, and that's the temperature of the liquid. Down to about 30 degrees, which is the temperature of the liquid, and it just stops. It can't deal with that shock.
Mm-hmm.
The chatter on the chatter on the Got Mead Live Skype right now is one of the ways you can avoid that raw honey taste is by blending with a super sweet mead when you're done, if you need to back sweeten, as opposed to just adding honey.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah. The things that I've seen on back sweetening is the conversation between just add honey versus dilute the honey and then add the basically honey water until you get what you want. Obviously, there are pros and cons to both sides, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't mind batch sweetening if I'm going to get it to the point where I want it, but I really want that to merge. That's really important, Yeah,
I listen to that and I say there's no way that I want to use water, because now I'm going to start diluting my mouthfeel, the volume.
Yeah, that's the downside of that.
But you still have to add the same amount of honey to raise the points up to a certain spot, and so by adding water to it, you're making it thinner and losing its legs and losing its mouth volume. But maybe that's what some people like too. I like a lot of nice volume, and we'll talk about what to look for when you're shopping for a yeast that will give you mouth volume as well here in a little bit. So some other things that we can look at when we're considering yeast is does this yeast create esters, or is it a clean fermenting yeast? And this is a for free on the side kind of side note that if you have a yeast that's known to make esters, the more that you underpitch that yeast, the more esters it will make. And the more yeast that you add in grams of the dried yeast, you can push that up some where you're eliminating some of those esters. Now, I have a friend here in Denver that he uses almost only one yeast exclusively, and I didn't like that yeast that much because of the esters that it created. It was K1V. And
that's my favorite.
Yeah, well, yeah, I learned to like it because I didn't give it a fair shake because I didn't like the esters that it made. But I found then later that if it ages for longer than what I was giving it a chance to age, at least, most of those esters go away, and it's a wonderful yeast. And lots of people say, well, that and EC, it's such an active, aggressive fermenter, that it blows off a lot of the aromatics. I found that if you drop the temperatures down low enough, then by doing that, you slow down that aggressiveness, and you're not really blowing off aromatics anymore at that point.
Yeah, so I regulate my fridge to 60 Fahrenheit when using K1V.
Yeah.
And I'm told that actually, I haven't played with it too much, but as you drop K1V, it actually throws more esters, I'm told. So you can actually drop the temperature even lower, and it's more likely to throw some of those esters you're referring to.
Yeah, that's what I got when I used it for apple.
You got too much esters?
Oh, not too much. It was really nice, actually. I liked the amount of esters I got from K1V with my apple batch.
Right. That's a good apple batch yeast to use for sure.
Yeah. Well, I also like it because of the kill factor, and who knows what's on the apples because I pick them wild.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's what I mentioned earlier, that you might want to get a kill factor yeast if you're putting wild fruit in fresh fruit. The stuff we buy in the store, that's fresh too, and so you need to do something about that. But frozen, when you freeze it, it kills all the bad guys. And then also last is mouthfeel production. Some yeast will give a much fuller mouth than the others because they create polysaccharides and I think monosaccharides as well. So anyway, it's a byproduct of the yeast themselves that makes a lot of volume. So there's a couple different ways to go about picking a yeast, and this might seem a little bit hard for some people. We know from the empirical evidence, in other words, we've tried enough meads, enough yeasts for so long that we just, you can ask people that have made mead for a while, and they can say, without having to go look at the handbook, that, well, I like this yeast for that. They may have not known what it was going to do when they first made it, but then they made the stuff and liked it, so they made some more and got familiar with that yeast. And we'll talk about that. I'll go back and give a list of different yeasts that work for different reasons. But if you don't know, let's say you want to try yeast you've never tried, and you can't find anybody else that's ever tried one of these yeast, but you're thinking about using it. Some guys will say, well, I'll look at my honey. I'll taste my honey. I'll do a honey tasting. I'll take a bunch of notes, and I'll write down what I get and what I don't have in there. Some guys are going to pick a yeast strain that will fill up the low spots. And then others will say, well, no, that's not the right way to do it, or that's I shouldn't have said that. They'll say, no, I think the best way is to take and find out what your honey's natural expression already is, and then pick the yeast that will most correctly support that even all the more. And so, in other words, find what's in the yeast, find what's in the honey, and then pick a yeast that will complement that and boost those pieces even further into the foreground.
Mm-hmm.
So, here's the problem when somebody says, well, I have this honey, what yeast should I use?
I can't taste it.
Exactly. I don't know because I don't have that honey in my mouth. And I don't know what you want to get from it either. I don't know what you're making. What are your intentions? So it's not a very fair answer to ask the Joe public without more feedback than that.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you want something that's clear and leaves anything, doesn't leave anything from the yeast, then that's going to be a different answer from if you want esters to if you want mouthfeel.
Right. Right. All